Okay, so today we're going to go over force and friction. Please make sure the page lines up with the notes that you have. All right, we're going to look at the anticipation guide. And one of the things you guys are going to notice is we went from 1, 2 to 5, 6. Please cross out 3 and 4. We're not doing them. All right, so on the left-hand side, please write true or false. Number 5, a force that happens when two objects are rubbing against each other is called friction. True or false? Number 6, the force that is always opposite of gravity is called tension. True or false? All right, let's flip back to the notes. So a reiteration of what we've already talked about, we're going to look at force again. Any object that causes something to speed up, slow down, or change directions with a push or pull is a force. Force is measured in newtons. Again, like I said, an example of force is the push or pull applied to any object. And you can see that the ball was pushed down the lane and it pushes all of those, like the first pin, and the pin pushes the next pin, and the other pin pushes the next pin. Force was applied. All right, so one of the big things we're going to start looking at is friction. Friction is a force or the force. And again, force is labeled with newtons. Friction is the force that opposes, is the opposite. It doesn't like the sliding motion of two touching surfaces. And friction depends on how rough the surface is. So that's the first thing friction is dependent on. And how hard the surfaces are being pushed against each other. So right here with this box being moved, you can see the surface of the, I believe that's a floor, and the surface of the box and how they're not exactly, flat. You see, like microscopic, it's a little bit rough. So the friction is how much force opposes, how much of this goes against it. All right, so when you think about force, you can think about maybe rubbing your hands together. When you rub your hands together, you sometimes have a little bit of hard times rubbing your hands together. But if you put lotion on your hands or sunscreen on your hands start to feel a little bit more, for lack of a better term, slippery. So it's easier to rub your hands together as opposed to when you don't have a sunscreen or lotion on. All right, so there are 4 different types of friction that we're going to look at. The first type is static. Static friction is a force that keeps an object at rest. It doesn't want to move. For example, this car that we see right here, it doesn't want to move. It wants to stay there. Like there's nothing really making it want to move besides these people pushing the car. If the people weren't pushing that car would be still. It would be static. Then the next type we have is sliding. Sliding friction is when two surfaces slide past one another in resistance. For example, sliding down a slide. Like you see my adorable little pandas right here, they are sliding down the slide. This is a sliding friction. Then you have rolling friction. It is between a rolling object, for instance, the skateboard that you see right here, and the surface that it's rolling on, like the sidewalk or the road. Yeah, that's a road. So either one of those, and I think even like that little thing that it jumps over, maybe that. And this is rolling. And then we have fluid. Fluid friction is when an object moves through a fluid, meaning either a liquid or a gas. And gas is, in this instance, considered a fluid. Is considered fluid. For example, you have my skydiving kitty who is skydiving through the air, the gas, and it is a fluid friction. And then you have my adorable little corgi down here who is swimming in the water. It is fluid. All right, then we're going to start looking back to what we've already learned about previously. Gravity. We know gravity is the force of attraction between two objects. So again, there's that force word. So how much attraction there is between two objects that have mass. The strength of gravity depends on the mass of the object and how far away the objects are. The gravity that we looked at so far is the gravity between the Earth and the Moon, and the Earth and the Sun and the Moon. So all of that affects. Sun is huge, but it's a lot farther away than the Moon is. So it has less gravity as opposed to the Moon, which has a little bit more gravity because it's closer to the Earth. All right, and the opposite force, or the force that opposes gravity, is air resistance. And you can kind of see this on our little not paraglider, I was parachute. There you go, parachute. Wile E. Coyote. So air resistance is a friction-like force that opposes motion of objects that move through the air. It depends on speed, size, and shape of an object. So if I was to compare dropping a bowling ball versus dropping a feather, the feather is less dense, it's flatter, there's more feathers to it. It kind of floats down. Whereas a bowling ball, it is spherical shaped in a circle, which means it's very aerodynamic. When I go to drop that, it's going to drop like a bowling ball. It's going to go drop straight down. Whereas the feather, like I said before, less dense, flatter surface, not as curved, has more resistance to it. It's going to kind of just float down. All right, quiz time. Quiz 2, friction. Again, I'd put that right on the table of content page because there's that empty spot at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1, what is a push or a pull? Is it a friction, air resistance, acceleration, or force? A push or pull. That would be force. Force is measured in units called what? Is it grams, meters, seconds, or newtons? This one's going to be newtons. Whereas grams is the unit for mass. Meters is the unit for distance or length. Seconds is for time. And then you have newtons. What is the force that opposes the sliding motion of two touching surfaces? Is it going to be friction, air resistance, acceleration, or force? This one's going to be friction. A kite in the air is an example of what type of friction? It's kind of floating in that air. Is it sliding, rolling, static, or fluid? This one's going to be fluid. All right. The attraction between falling apple, Sir Isaac Newton, and the ground is due to what? Is that due to friction, air resistance, acceleration, or gravity? This one should be gravity. All right, so let's go back to the anticipation guide. You're going to go back to 5 and 6. And number 5, a force that happens when two objects are rubbing against each other is called friction. True or false? This one is going to be true. Please put that on the right-hand side. Friction force depends on how the surface, how rough the surface is, and how hard the surfaces are being pushed together. Number 6, the force that is always opposite of gravity is called tension. This one's false. If you remember, this is air resistance. That is the opposite of gravity. All right, let's look at the summary. So, what does the force friction between two objects in contact depend on? The force of friction is dependent on how rough the surface is and how hard you're pushing two things against each other. What is the difference between force and friction? Force is when you use a push and pull to move something, where friction is kind of like the resistance of that movement. What are the similarities and differences between gravity and air resistance? Gravity is the attraction between two objects of mass, where air resistance is the resistance or the opposite of gravity, the wanting to keep up as opposed to go down. All right, so that is it for the notes. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and I hope you guys have a great day.